topics and opinions expressed on the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4WN Radio.
This is Beyond Confidence with your host, Divya Parekh. Do you want to live a more fulfilling life? Do you want to live your legacy and achieve your personal, professional, and financial goals? Well, coming up on Divya Parekh's Beyond Confidence, you will hear real stories of leaders, entrepreneurs, and achievers who have stepped into discomfort, shattered their status quo, and are living the life they want. You will learn how relationships are the key to achieving your aspirations and financial goals. Moving your career or business forward does not have to happen at the expense of your personal or family life, or vice versa. Learn more at www.divyaparekh.com, and you can connect with Divya at contact@divyaparekh.com. This is Beyond Confidence, and now here's your host, Divya Parekh.
Good morning, listeners. Tuesday morning, and I'm here with y'all, so super excited. And I'm sure, depending on where you were in the path of solar eclipse, that you did see it. And it is such a out of the world experience. So in North Carolina, we got approximately around like 70% coverage. And what was funny was listening to one of the kids say, I don't know if it was on TV or one of the neighbors' kids, saying that, oh, somebody took a bite out of the cookie. And it was just amazing to see. And it again brings back so many things in perspective, that we are so tiny. We are so little in comparison to the nature. And it's really important that we all come together, because together we are stronger. And I want to thank each and every one of you who have got our books. And if you have not, what I want to share with you is that do get our Entrepreneur's Garden and Expert to Influencer. I'm very thrilled to share, that these may be getting into one of the colleges as in terms of the book program. So that it's being considered. I don't know where it's going to go or not, but just the fact that it's being considered, both of the books to be part of the curriculum, it's very, very exciting. So just wanted to kind of share that with you. And as always, I'm going to invite you to keep that kind of circle going. Spend that hour of your time every month helping someone with no strings attached. And remember that these books will change your life. So if you've not got your copy, do get it. And let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, Dr. Shaan.
Hi, Divya. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, excited to have you on board. So share with us if you recall any moment from your childhood, moment or person that left a positive mark on you.
Yeah, so many people from my childhood left a positive mark on me, but I think one of the most important for me was my father. He's still with us, but he still had a really positive impact because he modeled success for me at an early age. What I mean by that is, he went to work he would wake up at 5 a.m. and he was a pharmacist. So he'd go to the pharmacy from 6 a.m. to 3 p.m. And he would come home, and then, we lived in a budget motel that he owned. And then he would help my mom run that from, 3 p.m. to 10 p.m. at night. And so he was a nonstop entrepreneur, as well as a healthcare provider as a pharmacist. And then he owned a gas station as well that they would run. And so, I think he's really the classic American dream story. He came to America with very little from India. And he's what inspires me to work hard. A lot of people think that I work hard, but I don't work half as hard as my own father.
Well, and it's wonderful to have a role model like that, because so many times you hear so many people complaining, and all of us do, especially even if it is something small like weather. And it's okay to complain, and yet it's also important to continue striving for your dreams. So, when you were a child, did you have any aspirations to become firefighter or anything else, as most kids do?
Yeah, what was interesting is, I think my own interest in was definitely towards medicine. I think
Mm,
my father encouraged that. My mother encouraged that, like many immigrant households do. But I also had a, natural interest in it, and so I volunteered at the local emergency room, and I always wanted to become a physician. However, one of the things that was interesting about my childhood was my unrecognized talents or abilities or interests. And what I mean by that is I was always tinkering around with buying or selling things. So in elementary school, I was selling Pokemon cards. In middle school, I was selling music CDs. In high schools, I would do a lot of eBaying, of buying and selling iPhones and things like that. In college as well. And so, I had this natural ability or natural interest in entrepreneurship, although I didn't really know about it. And so it wasn't until I started my own company, Prep Expert, which is a test preparation company that helps students with the SAT, ACT, and college admissions, that I realized that, I think entrepreneurship is a fantastic path for me from my natural abilities and gifts. I did end up, going to medical school and becoming a dermatologist, and I still pursue or I still practice teledermatology today. But I think, now I'm living my dream life as both a dermatologist as and an entrepreneur. But one of those talents was kind of more strategically thought about as a physician, and one more came about naturally without
mm.
me knowing it.
So, when you mentioned that, you were inclined towards medicine, so was it inspired by your dad being in the healthcare industry, or was that something that was naturally you gravitated towards?
Yeah, I think it was a bit of both. There's no physicians or doctors in my families that I really had a role model. So my father was my closest thing to a healthcare provider as a pharmacist. And, I would go to work with him occasionally on the take your kid to work day. And it was pretty interesting what he did. Um, and on top of that, getting the exposure of volunteering at the hospital nearby was really interesting. I met some awesome doctors there that inspired me. And so that's where I think the initial interest in medicine came from. And funny enough, that interest is what led me down the path of wanting to apply for combined medical programs, which actually is what made me study so much for the SAT. So, they had very high requirements for SAT and ACT scores for combined medical programs. And so, if I was not interested in medicine, I probably would not have studied so much for the SAT,
Mm,
which eventually, I raised my score from average to perfect, which then led to the founding of the company. So it all kind of wove together, but I was
mhm.
only able to connect the dots after.
Right. So, you mentioned about combined medical programs, and some of our audience may not know. So, are you talking about dual degree, or are you talking about finishing your bachelor's in medicine together?
Yeah, great question. So the combined medical programs typically refer to dual degree programs. So that's a BS. You get your bachelor's of science and your medical degree program at the same university. Sometimes you do it in 8 years, so 4 years for your bachelor, 4 years for your medical degree. Some are accelerated where you do it in a total of 6 years or 7 years even. And so these programs are amazing for high school students, especially for parents with high school students who are listening, because they give you automatic acceptance in a medical school directly out of high school. You don't have to worry about applying again, taking the MCAT, having to get high grades or extracurriculars. Your medical school seat is secured. And so that, was something that really inspired me because I wanted to not have to worry about that in college. And so I did end up going to a medical degree program at the University of Southern California. I got into a few different ones, including some prestigious ones at Northwestern. But ultimately, I made my college decision around not only the medical program, but USC gave me a full ride scholarship, which helped reduce or actually eliminate my college costs, which was really important for me.
Oh, definitely, because college expenses can be humongous on parents or like even for students walking out with student loans. And so during residency, there are so many different disciplines that you could have ended up in. What was it that drew you to dermatology?
Yeah, great question. So, I didn't really know that I was interested in dermatology until the very end of medical school. And that's because for, the listeners that may not know, in medical school, the last 2 years, you rotate through different specialties. So you'll rotate through internal medicine, surgery, psychiatry, etc. And at the very end, you have a couple of electives typically. And so I rotated through ophthalmology and dermatology. And what drew me to dermatology is, the ability to have a little bit of everything. What do I mean by that? So there's medical dermatology, there's surgical for skin cancers, there's obviously cosmetic, there's laser. And so I really enjoyed the fact that, there was a little bit of everything in dermatology. I didn't see that in other specialties. And now for me, I actually go to a different type of dermatology, which is teledermatology. Dermatology actually lends itself quite well to visual. And so being able to meet with patients by video or even by just having photos sent, I'm able to diagnose and treat 80% of conditions. Obviously, 20% I need to refer for a biopsy, et cetera. But that allows me to have the flexibility to be both a dermatologist as well as an entrepreneur by not having to, spend 50, 60 hours in a clinic every week.
Yeah, and that definitely makes sense. So when, like, how long did you practice? Like, it sounds like, you transition into teledermatology recently. How long were you in a clinic or associated with a hospital or something like that? And when did you decide that entrepreneurship was calling?
Yeah, so I actually decided right after residency that I was going to go to a clinic. And so in residency, I was in a clinic for about 3 years at Temple University Hospital. And the reason I decided to transition was actually during the COVID pandemic. I was in residency and I was in my last or second to last year. And we had transitioned much of our care during COVID to telederm. And that allowed me to see how efficient it was, as well as, that I was able to actually be more productive because the appointments were a lot quicker. And then I was able to have my other half day to do entrepreneurship. So I transitioned, right after residency into full teledermatology. But I think if I didn't have that pandemic experience going to a telehealth appointments, which I think, many patients and providers had at that time, I wouldn't have known about that as much. And so, in terms of, your second part of your question, which is when was entrepreneurship calling? It's a great question. And, I kind of always had entrepreneurship as my side hustle, as people call it now, quote unquote. Throughout college, medical school, residency, I always had Prep Expert, which is my test prep company, on the side. And I had my team, my operations team, my customer experience team, my tutors running the day to day operations because I started it in college almost 12, 13 years ago. And so I didn't spend a whole lot of time on it. But now, once I graduated from medical school residency, that's when I thought I would go all in and take over as the CEO, spend more time on the day to day, spend more time on the product curriculum, teach classes myself, and become more involved with the company because I think that we're able to reach a lot more students, which we're already doing now since I've been the CEO. And hopefully, become one of the largest test prep providers in the nation.
Hmm. So let's go back to the entrepreneurship. You mentioned that you had started in college and then you were also on Shark Tank. And there's so many entrepreneurs out there. It doesn't matter what the age, doesn't matter where they are in their journey, and they have this new idea. So tell us, like, what was the journey like to getting into Shark Tank and what happened after that?
Yeah, great question. So Shark Tank was an interesting experience. This actually happened, about 8, 9 years ago in 2015, 16 time. So what happened was at that time, Shark Tank was quite a popular show. And so I was, just like everyone else, just a fan of the show. And I was watching one day and I had an idea, which was, I have this small business in Las Vegas, Nevada, which is where I grew up, where I was doing a test prep company. I'd love to, expand it to other cities. I'd love to expand it online. I'd love to do more marketing, hire more people. And as I was watching the show, I thought, it would be a great business to take on Shark Tank and get investment and expand the company. And so I saw that they were doing auditions in New York City. And at the time, I was at Yale University doing my MBA. And so I took the train over to New York for 2 hours, and I ended up being the last person in line. And I spent about 9 hours in New York City waiting to give a 1 minute pitch to a casting call producer. And it was really kind of disheartening because the when I was giving my pitch, the casting call producer did not seem interested at all.
Mm.
He didn't smile once. And what was super interesting, and I think you'll like this, Divya, which is what made the casting call producer's eyes light up and him smile was at the very end when I pulled out my SAT preparation book. And so he was so impressed that I had written a book, that my face was on the book, and his whole mood changed. He asked if he could have the book for his nephew. And within a few weeks, I was being flown out to Los Angeles to pitch on Shark Tank. And so then, that was an amazing experience of itself, nerve-wracking, lots of preparation, just like the SAT. And, eventually
So
I was
there
able
may
to.
be a lot of our listeners who may be thinking that I want to get on Shark Tank. So tell us a little bit more about what they could do. So first of all, you mentioned that the auditions were in New York. So is it only in New York? Tell us a little
Oh,
bit more
yeah.
about that
Yeah,
process.
so if you're interested in pitching for Shark Tank, they still do the auditions this way, which is they go to
Mm.
different major cities around the United States. So, New York City, Los Angeles, um, there are some other ones, I think, in Atlanta. They change every year, so you'd have to kind of look at the Shark Tank casting call audition sheet. They also take some online and video auditions, so you can send that in. But of course, I encourage you going in person as I did, because I think you have a higher likelihood of getting on the show. So that's one thing. The other thing I would say is, as a tip to get on Shark Tank, make sure that you have some sales or something impressive about your product or service. I don't think it's a good idea to just go with an idea or a prototype. There were a lot of people standing in line when I went to the auditions, and they just had an idea, or they just had a prototype of a product. But it's very, very helpful when you actually have some sales, even if it's not a lot of sales yet, or you actually have a product or service that's been out for a while. As I had a book that had sold 50,000 copies, and you're able to speak to that to the casting call producer. So I think that will really help you if you're pitching the show.
And would you say that it would benefit the applicants to watch Shark Tank shows?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think one of the reasons that, I was able to have a decent 1 minute pitch. So it's interesting. You only get 1 minute to pitch the casting call producer. So you have to pack in a lot of information in that. And so what you want to do is you want to pack in, one, obviously what your product or service is, two, what's impressive about it, what's unique, three, if you have any sales or media coverage, and four, I would say you want to use the perspective of why this is going to be good for Shark Tank. And as you said, the only way to really know that is to have watched at least a few episodes, if not many episodes of the show. Why it's entertaining, if there's a particular shark that might be interested in this industry, in your industry, etc.
Oh, that's very helpful. And as you mentioned that you continued prepping for Shark Tank, and tell us about your experience when you got on Shark Tank. What happened?
Yeah, so that was a whole nother very stressful experience, of course, which was going on the actual show. I watched even more episodes of Shark Tank trying to think of, questions that the different sharks would ask. And I prepared a sheet of, I think it was 25 to 50 different questions with what my responses would be. And then, when I actually got on the show and they called me from the studio to go on, what's interesting is when you get on that stage, you forget a lot of what you had prepared. And so a lot of times you're just going off what's the top of your head because there's adrenaline, you're nervous, etc. And so I was, answering questions kind of just very genuinely from the heart. I told a lot of stories from my childhood, including the ones that I had mentioned at the beginning of this podcast about my dad working, 12, 15, 16 hours a day. And I think that really resonated with only one shark, really, which was Mark Cuban. The other sharks were actually more concerned that I was both a doctor and an entrepreneur. They didn't think I could be both. So they all did not give me a deal. But Mark Cuban really saw a little bit of himself in me. And he talked about his dad working really hard and inspiring him. So I think that connected emotionally. And so he ended up giving me an investment deal for $250,000 for 20% equity in the company. And Mark Cuban's been an amazing investor, advocate, and partner for the company ever since.
And so, would you say that when we talk about having a multi-million dollar company, Shark Tank is one of the ways. So, tell us what else went into the company as you were building it. What did you have to keep in mind? And where was your company when you went to the Shark Tank, and where is it now?
Yeah, great question. So, when I first went on Shark Tank, I was really just a small business, as I mentioned. We were only doing in-person SAT courses, teaching students in my hometown of Las Vegas, Nevada. And at that point, we had been around for about 4 or 5 years, and uh, it was a very small business because we didn't do any marketing. So there was literally, they had asked me my customer acquisition cost on Shark Tank, and I didn't know because the answer was $0 because we didn't spend anything on advertising. It literally grew for the first 4 to 5 years just by word of mouth, which I think is really important for entrepreneurs in that you make sure your product or service is good enough in the beginning to grow just by word of mouth, by customers telling other customers. And so that had us doubling revenue year over year to the point that before Shark Tank, we were at about a $500,000 in annual revenue. And we had done about $1 million total over the first 4 to 5 years. Now, after Shark Tank, we really started pushing the gas because we had investment, we had exposure on marketing, on digital marketing, and scaling the company. And that has led now. So it's been what, 8, 9 years since we've been on Shark Tank, and we've now done over 50 million. So 1 million to 50 million, um,
Mm.
$50 million in revenue. That's across our courses, our books, and licensed services. And so it's been an amazing ride in terms of growing and scaling the company. And obviously now we do spend money on marketing, so we have customer acquisition costs. And but I'm happy to say we've been profitable ever since the inception of the company.
Well, congratulations. Your hard work has paid off, and I'm sure that your parents, especially your dad, is very, very proud of you. So, you mentioned that Mark Cuban has been a great mentor. And can you share for our entrepreneur listeners and audience, what would you say, like, in this time where of course, you've successfully scaled from 1 million to $50 million. What are some of the lessons that you have learned from him and implemented in this venture?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's quite a few lessons, but some of the key lessons that, Mark has taught me over the years has been just building an amazing team. So Mark has an amazing team around him called the Mark Cuban Companies. That's his venture portfolio team that handles, business development, accounting, marketing, etc. But he's really made it clear to me that our company is only going to be as good as the culture and the team that you build. And so, in the beginning, when I was a small business before Shark Tank and in the early days right after Shark Tank, I would say we didn't really have the best team. We didn't have the right operations person. We didn't have the right customer experience manager. We didn't have the right um, marketing person. And so Mark recognized that, and he saw, we had some cultural problems that he helped us kind of root out those people. And that's the hardest part, honestly, of being an entrepreneur or a business owner, is having to let go of people that, have worked for the company just because the company outgrew them. They were great when it was a small business, but they were not great when, you're a national test prep or a national company that's growing, et cetera. You need to sometimes get better talent in the door. So I'd say one, building a great team and company culture has been super important and something Mark has helped us with. Two is, the importance of negotiating and never settling. So there was a licensing deal we had on the table where, we were licensing our courses out to an international company, and the licensing fee was honestly not very much. And Mark basically refused to do the deal unless they had really increased their licensing fees. And that really showed me the power of negotiation, because at the end of the day, we were able to double our licensing fee, double the revenue and contract out of that. And as an entrepreneur or business owner, you really have to know your worth and be able to negotiate. If you know Mark Cuban's backstory, he negotiated a $6 billion acquisition from Yahoo, which turned him into a billionaire. And I could see why after that negotiation. He's a hard negotiator for sure, and you really it's a skill that's not it comes easy to everyone. But I'm glad he's on my team, and so that was a big one. And then the third is the power to say no. Really important as an entrepreneur. As an entrepreneur, you can say yes to a million things and you can get overwhelmed. Mark does 800 emails a day to his different entrepreneurs and investments, but he says no to all meetings, because unless it's a really, really important event or a really important meeting, and that's important because it values his time. Because if he did a meeting with all hundreds of his, companies, he would never have any time. And so, he says yes to the right things, though. For example, we did an Obama Foundation entrepreneurship panel in person, well, a few weeks ago in Chicago, and he came to that and said yes. So you have to know, the right things to say no to and the right things to say yes to. And he's shown me that by example.
That's very powerful. So, what would you say? Like, you have shared the lessons and you have the culture, you have the team. Now, a lot of people achieve success, but what happens is that they're not able to sustain it and scale it. So, for doing that, do you have your own personal experiences that you'd like to share?
Yeah, absolutely. So I agree with you. A lot of times, there are many challenges in business. Not every year is going to be a record year, especially when you've been doing it, for decades, over a decade, as I have been. So how do you sustain success over a long period of time? I think, there's two or three key things that I would say here. The first thing is, as the entrepreneur or as the business owner, always try to focus on your product and making it, or product or service, and making it as good as possible for customers. Every week or every year, I try to improve my product or service substantially. So I am personally looking at all of our course content, curriculum, and trying to improve it from a student's perspective. I look at, some feedback that we get from parents and students, what's missing, what could be improved, and I try to add that into our courses and our tutoring and our curriculum. And the reason for that is because that's the number one form of marketing. I kind of mentioned it earlier. When I spent $0 on marketing, it was all word of mouth and allowing customers to tell each other, because you can spend a ton of money on Facebook ads, Google ads, and other advertising, but it gets very expensive. And if you don't have a good product or service that customers are telling other customers about, you end up spending way more on marketing than you need to, and you end up actually oftentimes not being profitable that way. So that's key number one, is like, as the entrepreneur or business owner, never think that it's time for you to move on from the product or the service, because that's what's driving the entire business. Number two, to drive success forward, I think learning from people who have done it and become more successful than you is really important. So for me, what I typically do is, one, I learned from Mark Cuban, of course, but I also hired a separate business advisor who's,
Mm.
helped companies scale to 100 million, 200 million plus in revenue. And I learned from different strategies and tactics that he has, and I try to implement them in our business. And then I also attend conferences, usually every 6 months. And sometimes it's related to education, but sometimes it's not. A lot of times it's just related to marketing or business or entrepreneurship, because I learn from other industries. And so I think, the key theme here is always be learning, whether it's, through advisors and mentors or conferences, or even books. I read a lot of books too on entrepreneurship and business.
Well, those are some very powerful nuggets. So, coming to your company, you talked about in the beginning that you were able to perfect your score so that you could get into the combined medical program. Now that said, what was it that drew you towards creating that as a business?
Yeah, this is a great question. So, when I was in high school, as you mentioned, I raised my score from average to perfect. And that opened up a lot of doors for me in terms of the medical programs I wanted to get into. I got into some other prestigious universities. I got $500,000 in college scholarship offers. So I didn't have to pay a dime for college tuition, housing, books, food, or anything else. And so when I got to college, I wanted to help other students improve their scores to improve their own lives the way that I did. And, I had written all of this strategies, content, techniques that had helped me during my own process. And so, originally, I actually did not want to start a business. I wanted to just write a book. I thought, I could write the first SAT prep book ever by a perfect score, and, it would be great. The problem was, I pitched it out to 100 literary agents and publishers, and every single one said the SAT prep market was too competitive, that I didn't have a platform to write such a book. And so that's when I took my destiny into my own hands. And I said, okay, well, if I'm not going to get the book deal, I'll take all this curriculum and I'll teach, one course before I go to medical school. It was really just supposed to be one course. But the first 18 students I had in that first 6-week SAT course, my students had an average score improvement of 376 points to their SAT scores, which is
Hmm.
equivalent of taking a student from the 50th percentile and putting them in the 90th percentile. So of course, I had parents and students who wanted more courses. So I began training other instructors to teach my curriculum, and the rest is history. Over the past 12 years at Prep Expert, we've helped over 100,000 students improve their SAT and ACT scores, get into top colleges, and most importantly, win over 100 million in college scholarships.
So there might be a question during pandemic, a lot of colleges had done away with SAT and ACT. So what's the current climate right now?
Great question. Yeah, so there's a lot of confusion among parents and students with test optional college admissions. There are really three reasons you should still take the SAT or the ACT despite test optional. Reason number one is there's a lot of studies now showing that even at test optional universities, students who submit test scores have higher acceptance rates, oftentimes two to three times higher when you have an SAT or ACT score versus when you don't. Reason number two is there are over $7 billion in merit-based scholarships
Hmm.
that are awarded to students who have high grades and high test scores. So if you don't have a high test score, you often won't be eligible for a full tuition, half tuition scholarship from a university, or many scholarships from private companies. And then the third reason is in the last couple of months here, there's actually been a huge resurgence of standardized testing requirements at top universities like MIT, Yale, Dartmouth, University of Texas at Austin, Brown University, Georgetown. So there are I heard UNC is actually considering it right now as well. And so they're going to be mandatory again at many top universities. So it's really not going to be a choice anymore.
Well, a confusing time for parents and students alike. So now that said, as you mentioned earlier, that this market is very, very competitive, and there are so many companies who have been out there for maybe 20, 30 years, some emerging new because it is a multi-billion dollar market. So what would you say that makes your program stand out from the rest? And as our listeners maybe, our audience may be considering it, what would it that would benefit them coming to you versus going to somebody else?
Yeah, so it is a very competitive market, and there are a lot of good test prep companies out there. What makes Prep Expert unique is I really believe we have the best score improvement guarantees, the best instructors, and the best curriculum in the industry. So for score improvement guarantees, we offer a 200-point SAT score improvement guarantee or a 4-point ACT score improvement guarantee after you take one of our 6-week live online courses. For instructors, we only hire 99th percentile instructors, so instructors who have scored in the top 1% themselves, as well as who have thousands of hours of teaching experience. So there are no amateurs or students or instructors who really don't know their content teaching. And then the third is the curriculum. As I mentioned, I've developed all of the curriculum myself based on my own methods, but based on my own experience raising my score from average to perfect. Much of the curriculum from other test prep companies is written by PhDs and folks who are already naturally good standardized test takers. That's not me. And I think a lot of students can relate to that. And what's really unique about the curriculum is I also teach strategies, tactics, and techniques that don't only help your student with SAT prep, but also help them with time management, productivity, self-control, delayed gratification, how to study effectively. So many parents and students come out of our courses and say, well, this didn't just help me with the test prep, but it helped me with my student become more serious about academics. They learned about how to study for their AP exams, how to study in college. So I think you get a lot more than just an SAT course.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm sure that a lot of our audience will be wanting to, and as you can see on our site, you will see that we have the website that you share. But like, can you share with us your website? And if somebody wanted to get in touch with you, how could they do so?
Yeah, of course. So for parents who have high school students, I highly recommend checking out my website, prepexpert.com. So it's prepexpert.com. You can find all of our SAT course schedules, ACT course schedules, as well as college admissions consulting services. We have courses starting every single week of the year, and you can see the 6-week schedules, the 8-week schedules. We have video courses, all kinds of stuff right at prepexpert.com. You can also find our books there. I just released a new book called Prep Expert Digital SAT Playbook, which you can find on prepexpert.com or on Amazon. And for those of you who'd like to connect with me, You can find me on any social media. And for entrepreneurs out there, I have a book called Self-Made Success, which you can find on Amazon as well.
Well, thank you for joining us and sharing your experiences and insights. And thank you, listeners, for joining us, because without you, the show would not be possible. Reach out to us, let us know how we can serve you and support you to succeed and have the life you want. And thank you, Juan, for making the show technically possible. Be well and take care until next time.
Thank you for being part of Beyond Confidence with your host, Divya Parekh. We hope you have learned more about how to start living the life you want. Each week on Beyond Confidence, you hear stories of real people who have experienced growth by overcoming their fears and building meaningful relationships. During Beyond Confidence, Divya Parekh shares what happened to her when she stepped out of her comfort zone to work directly with people across the globe. She not only coaches people how to form heart connections, but also transform relationships to mutually beneficial partnerships as they strive to live the life they want. If you are ready to live the life you want and leverage your strengths, learn more at www.divyaparekh.com. And you can connect with Divya at contact@divyaparekh.com. We look forward to you joining us next week.